Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about secure cloud computing, and we were just talking about specific programs. I'm going to throw it over to you, Nicholas. Give us an example. You gave us a great state of the state. Tell us about a specific program you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, Luke, thanks. I think there's always a theme when we talk about a special program or a special aspect of cloud computing or whatever topic we're talking about. There's always a theme that comes up, and in this one with cloud computing, I think the theme that's slightly bubbling to the surface here would be quantity. Lots and lots and lots of data that we now have the ability because of cloud computing to calculate against and to act against in a cost efficient and effective way. We didn't used to have that on-prem going through hundreds of millions of rows. As it was mentioned by Dr. Mays and by Michael, it was very difficult to get to spool up on-prem resources just for a big compute action and calm those things down when you were done. And one of the places that Snowflake has had a huge impact in our relatively brief time in public sector is fraud, waste, and abuse programs. This is a lot of data from a lot of different sources coming together in a single place and being worked on and looked at as, looking at human behavior is extremely difficult to predict and extremely difficult to categorize. It's why cybersecurity attacks have been so successful for so long. It's very difficult to get ahead of everything a person might do. And so bringing more data, as much data as we can, to bear to that problem and look at behavioral analytics and kind of churn through this data and look for things that are wrong. For example, it's very easy to say that somebody didn't have a hip replacement in California and Florida in the same day, right? You're either the most unlucky person on the planet or that was a fraudulent transaction. That's very easy for a lot of data and a lot of compute to pick out. What's even more difficult, though, are teams of people working together to defraud certain programs of the government. That takes a lot more data from a lot more sources and a lot more observations to really detect the patterns that tell us that fraud, waste, and abuse is occurring. So I think, there's a lot of, we could go on and on and on. Somebody mentioned COVID, there's health research, there's all these great programs that are coming out there that Snowflake has very happily been a part of. But I think the one right now that kind of strikes a chord with cloud computing for me is fraud, waste, and abuse.
Very important area and a lot of opportunity there, no question about that. Brian, you brought up a lot of interesting facts and figures there, and just want to ask you to perhaps highlight one activity. You've got a lot of different activities going on there, the automation activity, you got Rev 5, who knows when Rev 6 is coming. Tell us about a specific program you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the automation efforts that we've undertaken. The work that FedRAMP has done with NIST to develop OSCAL. Excuse me.
And if I could, OSCAL is what?
The Open Security Controls Assessment Language.
Okay.
I have to validate to see if I have that right. A lot of acronyms running around up here.
Sure.
But what this will enable to do, the implementation of this will enable agencies and cloud service providers to automate their packages. SSPs are upwards of 800 pages. 800-page Word document gets very unwieldy. And so being able to automate the package handling, doing validations of the package prior to it coming to an assessor in the government, huge valuable things, not just for the agencies, but for the cloud service providers as well. All in service of creating velocity, all in service of creating better quality packages. In addition, FedRAMP also published a threat scoring methodology for controls against the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And where this is important is the scoring methodology takes the controls, scores them against the MITRE ATT&CK framework on how well they detect, protect, and respond to incidents. And so what we've been able to do with the Rev 5, the NIST 853 Rev 5 controls, is NIST published their baselines, and typically the Joint Authorization Boards adds controls on top of the published baselines to make the NIST baselines more applicable to cloud. And so what we've done in our draft Rev 5 baselines is taken that threat-based methodology against those additional controls that are typically added, to see how well they actually do their job in supporting cybersecurity. And what we've done in our draft baselines, we've actually been able to reduce the number of controls in the FedRAMP high and moderate baselines, which translates into a significant value for not just the cloud service providers, but for the agencies as well. All of our modernization efforts, even looking at what I call the back end, the flip side of the coin, are internal business processes. We're working on business processes that are 10 years old, and so we have the opportunity to use automation to reevaluate our business processes to make sure that we're being more transparent, so cloud service providers can understand where their package is in the process, for agencies to understand where things are, how things are going, et cetera, and so forth. Again, it's all in service of helping the agencies and the cloud service providers get married up and have those secure cloud services available.
And undoubtedly reduce cycle time, which is awesome. That sounds fantastic. Chris, how about at Quest? Can you give us a specific example of a program you'd like to highlight?
First, shout out to Brian for reducing the number of controls that we have to respond to in an RMS.
Yeah, I like the sound of that.
They're draft baselines, Chris.
You have to start somewhere, sir. You start somewhere. So when we look at our agency partners, they're our favorites. Anyone that's in service or out of service. So those in active duty, for instance, as well as our veterans. So a lot of the programs we've worked on, and Brian, I appreciate your comments around legacy 10-year-old processes, because we work with agencies that have 20, sometimes 30-year-old processes. And they came to us and they're trying to modernize. But at the same time you're modernizing, you want to pull off that trick of helping an end user see that, hey, nothing's really changed. We've changed everything under the surface, but for you, nothing's really changed. To do that, that means the processes they've been using, whether it's identification, authentication, those things kind of have to remain the same. So we worked with DoD partners, for instance, to bring in that legacy infrastructure that they've built on usually Microsoft technologies, for instance, but then helping them spread that technology across the cloud, whether it is Microsoft-based, Azure-based, for instance, or AWS, and helping them integrate those identity principles across multiple control planes, or we call it multi-cloud, or as Mike called it, C2E. For them, that is critical, because when you have someone on the front line, or even someone who's come back from the front line, for instance, that is a complexity they don't need, for instance. So making sure those identities work across those different control planes without having to give them multiple identities, for instance, is critical. I, as an end user, know for one, when I come in the morning, I expect to be able to use every application with this persona. I don't want to have to, if you used an iPhone that required 4 faces to open, you'd break it against the wall. So helping them both in service and out of service veterans, for instance, and active duty, for instance, be able to use applications in the same way they have used them, I would say, for the last 20 years, may sound trivial, but from an end user satisfaction and mission deployability capability standpoint, that's critical to infrastructure. So working with identity across those planes for us is a critical mission. And that's not just in DoD, that's across the entire federal government. As Brian said, there's so many aging systems, but you have end users that will still expect those systems to perform as advertised or have the same SLAs. And I think we provide a great set of solutions to help an agency, one, identify, to migrate, consolidate, and secure those identities across multiple control planes as we move to the cloud.
Identity management is such an important part of the attack vector issue, and an important and instrumental element in the zero trust architecture as well. Michael, we're going to go up and talk about priorities. I'd like to get you to highlight your priorities, 2 or 3 priorities for this year in 2022. What are you all focused on right now?
So I think most of the federal government, as you're probably well aware, is in the midst of responding to and planning to implement much of the president's executive order on enhancing cybersecurity. And we're no different in that regard. There's a national security memorandum that talks about how to enhance cybersecurity across the board. A portion of that national security memorandum talks about, migrations to cloud, but then there's other components, multi-factor authentication, standardizing, auditing, and logging capabilities and and the retention requirements across the board. Zero trust, obviously, is a key tenet of that national security memorandum and the executive order, securing software supply chain, and the list goes on and on. So the vast majority of our efforts are going to be focused on implementation of the precepts that are identified in that national security memorandum. Now, beyond just that, I will tell you that, and it's been mentioned here, I think, a little bit in the past, is as we move into this multi-cloud ecosystem, what's important for us, not only for a cybersecurity perspective, but from an operations perspective, is getting the telemetry off of the cloud service providers that is in the native format from those cloud service providers, but being able to then normalize that so that we have a standard single view of operational and performance issues as they're occurring in our multi-cloud ecosystem. And in the same vein, we're pulling off of that cybersecurity relevant information amongst those cloud service providers. So we want to be able to obviously understand performance characteristics as we have workloads running in one particular cloud service. What are the differences if we move that workload to a different cloud service provider? And then how do we, and this was something that Chris mentioned, right? How do we track security relevant audit and log information, identity access, identity credential management, PKI certifications across various different cloud service providers, so that we're seeing a comprehensive picture? Fraud detection was one of the things that was mentioned, I think, by Chris, but equally important to us from a cybersecurity perspective is understanding how identity and access and application and data access controls in one cloud service provider are accurately reflected in the other cloud service providers. So if you're making an application cloud data access decision in one cloud service provider, is the same individual or the same entity trying to make other access calls in other cloud service providers? And should that be normal as based on the application and how it's architected and where its data flows are, or should that be flagged as abnormal? Those are the types of things that I think we need to spend more time on over the course of this year, which we'll be doing to gain better insights into a comprehensive cybersecurity view across all the cloud service providers as they're operating in real time.
You really raised some good points there. Hijacking identity in these collateral systems is where the fun starts, right? And where we had some of our biggest exposures based on that methodology. John, how about at Palo Alto Networks? Top focus for you all this year?
I mean, I think our primary focus in terms of how we're helping customers is to go back to that principle that I talked about the last time I spoke, about really taking the notion of security and moving it left in that time horizon. We see that really the best way to improve your security outcomes is to prevent problems from being created in the first place. I mean, that seems very obvious to everyone. And yet it's something that people have historically really struggled with, because the tools, the ecosystem, not just the security tools, but the overall ecosystem around cloud, historically, a lot of times people were really thinking of it just as a data center that happened to be in a different place. They were still creating things manually. They were still manually managing those assets. But as you've seen the technology mature within the ecosystem, and there being a greater level of adoption and knowledge of concepts like GitOps, and really trying to describe everything that you were deploying and using as some kind of code artifact, you really now have this awesome security opportunity to really improve your outcomes by being able to provide automation to go and check for those problems before those assets are ever deployed. So we have a whole set of technologies that help customers do that. But when I talk to agencies and even outside the federal space, just across all customers, people ask what's the most important thing they can do around cloud security. To me, the thing that's going to create the greatest outcome, the greatest positive outcome for you, is to begin inspecting those assets, be them container images, be them serverless functions, or be them infrastructure as code templates, as early in the life cycle as possible. When they're just sitting on a GitLab server or a file share or wherever it may be, looking at those things, finding problems in them, taking action on them before those problems are ever created.
Right. Again, as we open up this aperture of all these different types of capability, we certainly open up this attack surface as well. Ed, you talked about a lot of different things that you all are focused on. What are your top priorities for this year, for 2022, as you go on this cloud migration journey?
Well, definitely a couple of things. We've already talked a little bit about zero trust, so that's top of the top. But we're also still focusing on automation, right? We've done a lot of automation presently, but we really want to get to standardized automation and getting some new tools in there and having one approach across our enterprise, and that's pretty important to us. And the other thing is customer experience, and customer experience from the perspective of we've got our CI/CD pipelines. We those are standardized. But one of the things that we saw this year with operations, Allies Refuge and Allies Welcome, which was moving the people from Afghanistan, that we were interacting, with multiple agencies, whether it was Department of State, USCIS, U.S. Army, and this was one of those things about you don't really know how the other people perceive what you're sharing with them, right? Or the tools that you're sharing with them. So customer experience became pretty important to us to make sure that not only can we deliver, code that was doing what it was supposed to do, but also making sure that it was easy to use and a quick, so that you have to go through a high learning curve. And that was pretty important to us. And it really paid dividends in terms of what we did with Operations Allies Welcome and Allies Refuge.
Tremendous focus and a brilliant response to that. So I applaud all the agencies involved in that. Nicholas, top priority for Snowflake this year?
Well, Luke, looking at this year, it's going back to some of the foundation of what Snowflake became popular for. One of the few platforms, in fact, the only data platform today that runs across clouds. And that's important because the goal I have for this year is to get more agencies to talk to each other and collaborate on data using the Snowflake platform. I mean, if you think about it, Dr. Mace just talked about how he would collaborate with USCIS and with the US Army. How can we really do that unless we have a shared platform or a shared experience or a well-designed enterprise that enables that kind of collaboration? If you hear our CEO talk or you go to our website, you'll hear about the data cloud over and over and over again. And what the data cloud really is the next level, the next evolution of the Snowflake platform that allows folks to collaborate and trade data sets similar to how you might trade playing cards. Data sets for Snowflake are like apps on your app store, but instead of Angry Birds, you're getting housing prices or the latest data set from NOAA on weather. Every government agency has a specific mission. That's what they were designed to do, and that's awesome. But no agency has a sole purpose. They all work together to accomplish what they're going to work together. Michael's agency works constantly with FBI or the Department of Homeland Security. These kinds of collaborations keep us safe, keep us healthy, keep us financially secure in this country. And so we have to keep pushing that collaboration and helping agencies work together stronger and better. That's my top priority for this year, is to introduce the data cloud for government using the Snowflake platform.
You raise a good point about every agency has a specific mission, no question about that. But they also have they're sort of striped across a user experience, which is what I think Ed was bringing up there. Important to focus on that user experience. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.